Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Our first panel today will focus on how the Girardi scandal came to be and the impact on ordinary people when attorney misconduct is permitted to continue unchecked. We have two witnesses who will be given 10 minutes each. Aaron May, a partner at Halpern, May, Ibarra, and Gelberg, and then Jillian Ingledow, a former Girardi Keese client. So we'll begin with Aaron May.
Good afternoon, senators and assembly members. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. My name is Aaron May. I'll give you a little bit of background about me. I'm currently a partner at the Halpern, May, Ibarra, Gelberg law firm, which is a boutique law firm in Los Angeles. I'm a graduate of Stanford Law School. After law school, I clerked for 2 federal judges in California, and then went on to practice at Munger, Tolles & Olson as a litigation associate, where I worked on internal investigations and other matters. From there, I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Central District of California, where I was in the major fraud section for approximately 7 years. And in that role, I ran grand jury investigations and worked closely with the FBI, DEA, IRS, and other federal agencies in conducting my investigations. In 2014, I founded my current law firm with some of my partners, and we now have 4 former federal prosecutors at our firm. And one of the main things we do is we conduct internal investigations, and we do that for some of the largest institutions in California, both public and private. In September 2021, the State Bar Board of Trustees hired me and my firm to conduct an independent investigation of the State Bar. As backdrop, and I think most of you all know, over Girardi's legal career, there were close to 205 complaints made against him. And over the vast majority of that time period, there was no public discipline meted out against him except in 2021 when he was disbarred. The State Bar initially hired Elise Lazar, a former State Bar prosecutor, to analyze the Girardi files to determine if the reason there was no public discipline over the years was because of Girardi's improper influence or connections to the bar. Ms. Lazar reviewed 130 files, and while she found issues with how those cases were handled, she was unable to see any undue influence from her reviews of the files alone. That's where me and my firm came in. We were hired to look outside the 4 corners of the files, to dig into the evidence to see whether there were influence and corruption involved in the handling of State Bar's handling of Girardi complaints. In particular, our mandate was to investigate whether the State Bar's handling of past discipline complaints against Tom Girardi was affected by Girardi's connections to or influence at the State Bar, and identifying actions by anyone with ties to the State Bar that may constitute malfeasance in how discipline complaints against Girardi were handled. To be clear, we were not looking at whether Girardi actually violated any ethical rules or laws or stole any money. Our focus was on the bar's handling of complaints against Girardi. The process we went through to conduct our investigation had multiple stages. The first was collecting documentary evidence. We collected approximately 1 million documents, most of them from the State Bar itself. We also were able to obtain documents from the Girardi Keese law firm and from other sources as well. We then went about and conducted 74 interviews of individuals. Those interviews included current and former State Bar employees, board members, and officers. We also interviewed former Girardi Keese attorneys and employees, as well as others that were involved with Girardi and the Girardi complaints. We did have subpoena power, and so some witnesses refused to meet with us voluntarily, but we were able to compel those who refused to meet voluntarily to meet with us under court orders. 2 witnesses invoked their Fifth Amendment rights when we questioned them and refused to answer, including Tom Girardi himself. We prepared a detailed 94-page report, which we delivered to the State Bar Board of Trustees in February. And I will do my best to try to summarize what we found. And I'm happy to go into more detail on any questions that anyone has. The first major finding that we had was that Girardi maintained an extensive network of connections at all levels of the State Bar. As one witness told us, it was like Girardi was a part of the fabric at the State Bar. Girardi cultivated contacts on the board, in the executive director's office, in the office of the chief trial counsel, both at managerial levels and in line prosecutor and investigator levels. His ties span decades, and they appear to have been intentionally cultivated. We found evidence that Girardi was involved in the appointment of at least one State Bar court judge and the attempted appointment of the chief trial counsel. We found that at least 9 former State Bar employees or board members had connections to or accepted items of value, travel or meals or other items from Girardi while they were working at the State Bar or on the State Bar court or were on the board. In particular, former State Bar employee Tom Layton, along with his wife, received gifts and payments estimated to be at over $1 million in value from Girardi and from Girardi's firm. Much of that while Layton was employed at the State Bar. This included approximately $600,000 in cash, leased luxury cars, free reign of a Girardi Keys credit card, travel on private jets and otherwise, and other benefits. Tom Girardi was godfather to Mr. Layton's daughter and also employed 2 of Mr. Layton's children while Tom Layton was employed by the State Bar. We also found that high-level executives, including former executive director Joe Dunn and former board president Luis Rodriguez, accepted rides on Girardi's private plane while in their roles at the State Bar. Multiple other employees accepted tickets to concerts and sporting events while employed at the State Bar. And many individuals at all levels attended lavish dinners and parties thrown by Girardi. In addition to Layton having children employed by Girardi's firm, another investigator also had a daughter who was under Girardi Keys' employ while the investigator was employed at the State Bar. In addition, Girardi would offer to assist State Bar employees with judicial appointments and other career advancement opportunities. And while we did find these historical connections, it's important to note that we did not find any current connections between Girardi and any current State Bar employees, judges, or board members. We also found that complaints against Girardi were, in some instances, closed by individuals who had connections to or had received items of value from Girardi. In particular, as it relates to case handling, we found that 2 former OCTC employees, Murray Greenberg and John Newton, had conflicts of interest at the time they worked on Girardi case as a result of their connections to Girardi. The Girardi cases they worked on were closed without public discipline and some under questionable circumstances. We concluded that these employees' conflicts tainted the discretionary decisions they made on behalf of the State Bar and that the Girardi cases they worked on were improperly handled as a result. We also found that former executive director Joseph Dunn terminated 2 senior attorneys in the Office of Chief Trial Counsel during the same time period when those attorneys were advocating for serious changes to be brought against Girardi in pending State Bar cases. This was an unprecedented move, as the executive director's office did not typically interfere or involve itself in the management or operations of the Office of Chief Trial Counsel. One of these employees was advocating for the State Bar to reconsider the decision by an outside counsel to not further discipline Girardi, and the other employee had recommended a complaint against Girardi go forward with public discipline, with filing of a complaint. In addition, We found that both the Executive Director's Office and the Office of General Counsel had received reports about Girardi's influence at the State Bar and connections to Layton and others, but failed to investigate the complaints. In 2013 and 2014, reports came into the Executive Director's Office that Layton had ties to Girardi and was assisting Girardi. No investigations were conducted and the matters were closed. The decision to do so was endorsed by Bob Hawley, who was then the Deputy Executive Director at the time. Separately, or potentially relatedly, Bob Hawley also closed the Girardi investigation by ghostwriting the memorandum advocating closure. Pursuant to State Bar Rule 2201, whenever the OCTC had a conflict of interest, it was supposed to refer out for discipline any cases to an independent outside attorney to handle. We discovered that Hawley had been ghostwriting cases and drafting memorandum for outside counsel, and then at least in one instance, maybe more, passed off the work product of the passed off this work product as if it were from the work product of the independent outside counsel, and this included a Girardi case. Those are the major findings of our investigation and report. That's obviously at a very high level, and I'm welcome to answer any questions that any senators or assembly members have for me.
Thank you very much, Mr. May. We appreciate your report. Our second witness is not available at this time, I'm being advised, okay? And so, Mr. May, maybe I'd ask you if you could to spend a few minutes to maybe let us know. Our second witness was a former Girardi client, and Ms. Ingledow, you're probably familiar with. And so she was going to generate, the general substance of her testimony was going to be that the firm used tricks and non-communication to defraud her out of a settlement for medical expenses that she desperately needed. Would it be possible for you maybe to go into at least a little bit of detail about ways that some of these clients, the effect on some of these Girardi clients?
Thank you, Chairman. That, to be clear, that was a bit outside the focus of my investigation. We were focused on the impact of Girardi's connections at the State Bar. We did not dig into any of the case files and the conduct that Girardi was allegedly doing with respect to his clients. And so the only insights I have from that are from reading the case files, which I understand I am not permitted under law to discuss under the Business and Professions Code. So I don't have a source of information on that I'm free to communicate.
Okay. That's understood. Thank you for your testimony, Mr. May. I'll turn to the panel and see if anyone has any questions for Mr. May. Mr. Umbrook.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. May, for both your testimony and very comprehensive report. There was a background paper that was prepared for this hearing. I'm wondering if you had a chance to review it.
I have not.
All right. Well, we'll provide it to you, and then I realize this is pro bono activity at this point, but I personally would be interested in your reaction to some of the proposals at the end.
Understood, and happy to look at that and give you any commentary I can provide.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other further questions from the committee? Mr. Seeley.
Thank you, Mr. May. Just a quick question. You looked at some of the ways that Mr. Girardi influenced decision makers. Did you also look at political contributions?
That was not a focus of our investigation. We are aware that he did make political contributions, including to some of the legislatures who had appointment power connected to State Bar positions.
Okay. And remind me again, what was the scope?
The scope of the investigation was to look at Girardi's influence at the State Bar and whether his connections influenced the outcome of any complaints that were made against him.
Okay. And in that scope, you say political contributions to those not at the state bar would have been outside your scope?
So we were aware that he did make political contributions to presidential candidates and candidates at all levels of politics, and that he had close ties to the governors, to the assembly members, senators at both the local, state, and national level, and that it was understood that he could get in contact with political representatives with a simple phone call at almost any level, as high as the president and everywhere in between.
Didn't he also make political contributions to Director Joe Dunn?
That's correct. We did see in connection with our investigation that he did make political contributions to Senator Joe Dunn, and I believe it was to 2 different campaigns of Senator Joe Dunn while he was running for senator.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments from the committee? Ms. Reyes.
Thank you. In the background information that was provided to us that I know is going to be provided to you, there's mention of over 150 complaints against Girardi before 2021. And I understand that most of those were not investigated. Were any of those investigated?
Well, I think the answer would be yes, that for every time there's a process for the filing of a complaint. So a complaint comes in, it goes into intake, at which point a decision is made whether to close the case at intake or pass it along for investigation. The investigation team then decides, after doing their investigation, whether to file a complaint against the attorney, or in this case, Mr. Girardi. So there definitely were cases that made it past intake into the investigative stage, but I don't believe any of those made it past the investigative stage into the filing of a public complaint, except in 2021.
Thank you. And I really would be interested, as was noted earlier, in your input on the suggestions on what we can do better to protect the public in the future. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we will turn this portion over to Senator Umberg. Senator Umberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're now going to turn to, thank you, Mr. May. I really appreciate your participation, and we look forward to any input you might have concerning the proposals. All right. We'll